Morning, everyone. My name is Whit Jamieson, and I'm a senior specialist with Forth. I've been here for about 7 years, and I've been working with utilities and the Clean Fuels program in Oregon and Washington for the past few years. I'll be your moderator for today, and if you want to, please drop in where you're joining us from into the chat. Today we're discussing EV growth and grid readiness in the Pacific Northwest and beyond. Our speakers will highlight practical approaches to demand management, infrastructure investment, and preparing for the future of electric vehicles. We have 3 wonderful panelists today, all with 3-letter names, starting with J, just as we intended. Jon, Jen, and Joe, please turn on your cameras for the introduction. And Jon's running into some camera difficulties for now, and hopefully we'll get him on a bit later. But if not, he'll still be here, just talking. First, we'll have Jon Jantz, CEO of Gradient Xergy, who will talk about how the Pacific Northwest electrified rural areas and how that impacts what utilities are facing today. Next, we'll have Jen Szaro, President and CEO of the Association of Energy Services Professionals, AESP, who will talk about what some of their member utilities are doing. Finally, we'll have Joe Hull, Customer Solutions Specialist 3 at Eugene Water Electric Board, EWEB, who will focus on his experience with customers across various utilities and programs. And now I'll pass it over to Jon. Joe and Jen, you can turn off your cameras.
Good morning, everyone. This is one of my favorite topics here. I get to talk about history of the grid in the Northwest. So I'm going to give a little overview of where we've come from, kind of teeing us up for where we're at today and the challenges we're facing and where to go from here. So for a little review of the grid in the Northwest here, rural areas a century ago, while power had come to the cities, automobiles were in the cities, rural areas were very different and life was still pretty difficult. And there wasn't running water. My grandma would tell me stories about walking with her sister to go to the creek, growing up in rural central Idaho, and bringing back buckets of water to use. And so everything that was done manually. And this, it was how life had been for a really long time, right? But society was changing, and we saw some crises that really accelerated those changes. And so the Dust Bowl and the Depression in the 1930s, was a really big crisis the nation was facing. A lot of people were out of work, farmland, it was just really hard to grow crops, and there was a lot of struggle. And then World War II. And so an answer to these crises was electrification. And so here's looking at Grand Coulee Dam, and it answered multiple crises here, where it provided irrigation for new cropland, which had just been sagebrush for time immemorial, and then rural areas through the Rural Electrification Act were then being served with power. And that was a really big deal. Their life changed dramatically in those years for people, where all of a sudden they could have running water and the conveniences of modern life. And it just completely changed how the country was addressing these efforts. And what we did in those years is just staggering to think back on. The transmission build out from a few hundred miles of the federal system in the Northwest to a couple thousand miles in 5 years. It was a 10x build out. It just still amazes me looking back at what was done here in this era. And it really addressed rural poverty. And so after the war, we had a lot of electricity to serve factories, here in the Northwest for aluminum smelting and then building airplanes was a big deal. And so we had these booming industries post-war. And electric utilities rode this wave and brought a lot of appliances, and actively campaigned bringing appliances to people across rural America and the country as a whole. So we saw this rapid adoption of whole bunch of different technologies in the country during this era, and pretty rapid load growth too. And from the 60s, we enter another series of crises. We had two oil shocks, the 70s, and then, there was a whole conversation about energy conservation. And so out of that, we had the Northwest Power Act in 1980, the Northwest Power Council, and, there was new rules there, but new benefits too, where we brought energy efficiency to people and help people save money by using energy more efficiently. So as we're seeing a theme here, where out of crises are born new things. So we fast forward again, and kind of looking back, here's a look at load growth since 1950, and we had this really strong growth for decades. And people were really used to building new generation, building transmission. Like that was kind of in the DNA of folks who worked at utilities and of the G&Ts. But things changed, and for those of us been working in the space, in the last number of years, in the preceding decades, like things have been pretty stagnant and more flat. I picked this because it was a projection of what load growth was going to be before the loaded word of data centers came onto the scene. And this was just looking at transportation electrification and more reindustrialization and building electrification. But right now, we're kind of looking back to the future to learn how to rebuild these muscles. So as things are just all over the map right now. If you look at load forecasts, and I've seen stuff in ERCOT, just huge disparities between what people are forecasting for load growth. And a lot of it due to data centers, right? But a lot of it's just uncertainty. And for any business, it's really challenging to deal with uncertainty. I think especially in the utility industry, like there's an industry built and keeping costs low for consumer-owned utilities. That's their mandate to people. And I think it's really challenging because today it feels like there's so many different risks. And in this era of stagnant load growth, like I think utilities and G&Ts and the industry itself become much more risk averse, much more siloed. The industry became a lot more complex. And so it's challenging right now. It's scary to make the wrong decision. We had some missteps over the years of picking technologies, right? And now there's all these new technology choices, and it's just this feels like an onslaught of new stuff, which offers the promise to really change how the grid runs. And if we look at transformers, they've been the same for over a century in most ways, but now we have solid state transformers that could really enable bidirectional power flow, could offer DC connections, between distributed resources like vehicles and batteries and solar, things like that. And it's the connection of all these. So new technology can be used to build the future grid of this coming century. And we look at these pictures of these control rooms, and this seems so futuristic in ways still, right? But I think in the not so distant future, that's going to almost look antiquated as we move towards autonomous energy grids of bidirectional power flow. But getting there is not easy because these muscles of change have atrophied, and my other speakers here are going to talk about that more. But I think we're going to change more in the next decade than we have in the last 5 to 9 decades. So we're already seeing really rapid load growth in some places. It's not uniform right now, but a lot of places are seeing increased wholesale power costs. There's extreme weather driving that. There's infrastructure that's had deferred maintenance, or just stuff that's needed to be replaced for decades, right? And all this is coming together with build out of data centers and all these different things, and just inflation in general, right? And so people are struggling, and we're seeing all these costs. And when the IRA was passed, it had $10 billion for co-ops across the country, and I feel like that barely even scratched the surface, the need out there. And I think, people out there, there's a lot of people struggling right now. And, depending where you're at, between 1 in 4 and 1 in 6 people can't afford their utility bills. And that's leading to backlash towards data centers and some utilities, and just it's a challenging road right now in this space. But I think there's a lot of opportunity to really advance and to take this leap forward. So, a lot of these same issues that persisted, that were in rural areas a century ago, that led to the Rural Electrification Act, they're still there, right? Rural areas don't have the density where, transit's just easier in a city. You look at refuse collection, broadband, you name it. It's hard to make investments in new technology when one person wears a dozen hats, and people are trying to do a lot with little. And so I think this really, it's an opportunity, but it's a challenging time, and it's not easy to take a hold of these opportunities. So I'll wrap up this first look at the history here with some of the work that we're doing with Fourth. I'd encourage you to reach out to Whit and I to talk about how we can help and provide support. And part of this is looking at what your needs are. And Joe will talk more about what EWEB's done in this space. And a lot of this, I've found that, especially for rural utilities that or somebody's wearing a dozen hats, if utilities can work together and learn from one another, I think that's really powerful. And we're here to help facilitate that, and then also provide technical assistance. So, all right, well, thank you very much. Keep that brief and pass it on to Jen here.
Perfect. All right, Jen, please join us.
All right, sounds good. So that's the history, and I'm going to take us a little bit into the present now with some EV demand flexibility case studies. So I'm Jen Szaro. I'm the president and CEO for AESP, as was mentioned. And just quickly, we can talk a little bit about AESP on the next slide here. Will it go forward? Or you're going forward for me, right? So we're about 6,500 members across the US and Canada. We're a nonprofit similar to Fourth, 501c3. And we really focus on helping energy professionals create customer programs in this space, and demand flexibility, energy efficiency, and of course, EV is an area that we focus on. So specifically today, we're going to talk about demand flexibility and EV and what we can do in that space to help move these programs forward. And generally, we don't talk about EV in a vacuum. And today we'll talk a little bit, but really we see EV as part of a whole. It's one tool in your toolbox, and we don't think of it as its own thing, but rather one of the things that you need to be managing from a demand flexibility standpoint. So it's really a cross-functional utility issue and not a standalone transportation issue. Next slide. So again, one piece of a larger load management puzzle. It's really important for utilities to think about EV strategy as a piece, and ask the question, how do you pull different parts, different departments together when you're tackling these types of issues? Thinking about a strong strategy usually includes things like rates, devices, DERMS, your planning departments, but most importantly, the community and the customer's trust and equity. But there is no one size fits all answer. So you're going to see several different case studies today that all meet the bill. They're just different approaches based on meeting the customer where they're at in your community. So one of the important messages I try to share with our members is no silos. Never just put your head down and do the EV thing and put it off to the side. It's really important to be thinking about EV as part of an overarching demand flexibility program. If you think about supply side technologies, you don't plan those in a vacuum. You know, it's part of your portfolio. Demand side technologies are no different. It should really be a high value entry point, but it's not the whole strategy. So EV charging goes right there with smart thermostats, water heating, battery storage, solar and other DERs, and what you're doing with commercial loads as well. So that's kind of what we try to have people think about when they're thinking about their EV program planning. And then a big practical question is not about how much EV load are you expecting, but how much of that load can really be visualized, shaped, and measured and trusted as part of your demand side portfolio. So we're so used to kind of, again, as Jon was mentioning, sort of pushing big things at load. And from a supply side management standpoint, that's how we planned in the past decades. And now we're getting much more detailed and integrated and orchestrated. And so the approach is changing pretty rapidly. And now the functions are being pulled together where we're looking at distribution planning much differently. And it brings in these other departments again. So no silos goes in that direction too, where you need to be thinking about customer programs, the regulatory aspects. Measurement and verification becomes more and more important here in IT data, rate design, equity, and your trade allies, because they're the ones in the field that are helping you deploy these types of programs. Next slide. So I've got 6 case studies to share with you today. Some are in the Northwest, but some are broader and across the country. All of them provide a different approach, and I think can lend themselves to the Northwest. Next one. So I'm going to start with Clark Public Utilities. Curious if anyone here is from Clark, because then they can add to the conversation. So if you're an attendee and you're from Clark, give me a thumbs up in the chat. So this one's in Washington State. It's a residential EV managed charging and transportation electrification plan. So it's a holistic plan. Their approach is sort of enroll, use telematics, shift the peaks, and plan for grid growth. So it's a public power organization in the Northwest. They give a $50 bill credit for enrollment, and then upon completion, you get additional incentives. So instead of just rebates, they've moved into direct EV flexibility using a program called Optiwa to shift home charging away from seasonal peaks. It uses telematics, and that reduces the friction of participating with the hardware. So the customer can opt out, and it's a pilot program, but that's going to be used to inform EV adoption patterns. And so it's a really swift program. The typical event length is about 4 hours, and the program runs to the end of this year. So their current program participation limit for this pilot is 1,400 EVs, but it's focusing on telematics, where some other programs are focusing on the chargers themselves, or customer volunteer usage. So it's one way to go. I think it's a pretty interesting program, and it's right here in your backyards. So curious to see. I don't see anybody putting anything in the chat, but great program. And I have the links down here for all of the programs. So afterwards, when you get the slides, you can learn more about each of these programs after the fact. All right, next program we have is Idaho Power, again, not too far from you. This one is a time of use pricing, so rate design as the foundation for their EV flexibility program. They've got a demand response portfolio as well. So they've got these 2 rates, off-peak and on-peak, and then they have a mid-peak rate. So it goes from 7.5 cents per kilowatt hour for their summer off-peak rate all the way up to 29.9 cents for their summer on-peak rate. So that's a 75% shift. And then they've got this $10 cap as well for your bill protection, which I think is really cool. So their message is rate-led. They're using price messaging to help you participate in their program. So this is a pretty easy rollout, but it's behavior-based. You know, that's a good question. I'm not sure for the first year how that works, but it's for year 1, the cap. So there is a link here at the bottom again for their program. And I guess we're going to have Q&A at the end of this. So I will get back to you on details for that. Why I like this one, though, is because it was pretty easy for them to set up. It's just a rate design, and people sign into it, so they opt in. It's passive, strong price signals. Where time of use programs tend to fail is when they don't send strong enough price signals. So the fact that there's a decent gap between the two prices is important. And it's got a lot of customer education that they did prior to doing the rate design. And so that's another really important piece is you've got to get the customers buy-in and you've got to do the work upfront before you launch the program to make sure they understand so they don't get the sticker shock when they're charging off-peak on accident. All right, next program. So this one's down here in my neck of the woods here in Orlando. This is a public charging strategy across the board. OUC started under my leadership way back in the day when I was working there. And they've just continued to grow their program. They have a lot of public infrastructure that they actually launched first back in 2008, 2010, right before the vehicles started to roll out. So they started with public awareness. They continued to build on those programs. And in January of this coming year, they'll be launching a shift and save time of day rate strategy as well. But they've done a lot with infrastructure and rate design as their foundation for their programs, as well as a ton of fleet charging programs as well. So pricing modernization and shifting demand rates is really their focus. So really great way to start in a territory that has no external policies or signals related to policy in the state of Florida. So this is all driven by demand in their service territory without any kind of policy signals at all. Next program. So this one's in Colorado in a snowy little area. They have really, really challenging demand issues, and they have a lot of renewables. So this program is interesting because it's helping to use EV to absorb some of that excess renewable energy capacity. So they're solving two different programs with grid management. So they have a flexibility tariff, and it's targeting the specific areas of residential, multifamily, and workplace charging where they're seeing the most activity with their EVs. They have a 4 to 9 p.m. common peak event window, and then the duration's usually 2 to 3 hours of what they expect of their actual peaks. So their targeted peak demand event limit is 96 hours per year, and their renewable production event limit is 300 hours per year. So that's what they're trying to solve for. So they have a rebate, and they have this flexibility tariff. They have controls in place, which that's what they're using, the direct load controls, and then they're trying to offset the renewables. So it's a really cool program. I encourage you to read more on this with the link that I attached here in the slide. Holy Cross is definitely an innovator and one to watch. They're doing some very cool stuff. Next slide. Then I have SMECO here. They're up in Southern Maryland. They have a really nice program. It's a great sort of starter program, you know, for people where they're meeting them where they're at. So they had a little bit of a slower adoption. So they developed this residential program where it's kind of a nice double path approach. So for people who are up for it, they have a managed charging program. And then for those that are just sort of ready to dip their toe in the water, they have this other program that's a little less directly engaging. So they have more of an off-peak program where you're just charging off-peak voluntarily. So they can choose between the two different programs. So they're meeting their customers where they're at. They can choose the automated program or the self-directed off-peak program. So great program, very flexible, kind of meeting their customers where they're at. All right, and then the next one. And then we have Ameren, Illinois. What I really wanted to point out with this program is it grew quickly, number one. You can see where they started in 2023 with demand flexibility program offerings and where they ended in 2025. So 2 years of growth, and they more than tripled their demand flexibility participation. What's interesting with this is it started out as a goal with demand flexibility and became a community resilience program in addition. So I love that they really found this dual use for their EV programs. It helped with their equity and low income community program support, but it also served as a resilience hub for their customers as well. So again, there is a link here in the chat for you in the slide to learn more about this one. All right, and next. So this just gives you a quick summary of all the different kinds of programs. what they took as their primary flexibility pathway. Again, no one size fits all. And then what their cross-functional feature was, so how they kind of tackled things. So I just really want to stress that there's no one single right way to design an EV program. And demand flexibility should not just include EV in your planning. It should really be thinking across your different technologies. So it's a great way to get started. But flexible demand should be across multiple technologies. So great way to get started, but keep on going. And that's all I've got for you.
All right. Thank you, Jen. For any audience folks that have questions or hot takes, please put them in the attendee chat. Joe, please turn on your camera and join us.
Hello. My webcam is not turning on now. I have been infected with whatever John has, apparently. And I also don't have slides, so you're just going to get to look at a still image of my face. Sorry about that. I'm Joe Hull. I have been in the public power industry for about 12 years. I've worked at a couple rural co-ops, and I currently work at EWEB, which is a municipal utility in Eugene. My primary task is energy efficiency, but it seems pretty common at utilities for EVs and solar and demand response to get thrown into the conservation sector. And there's a reason for that. We are good at delivering customer programs, rebates, education, things like that are what we do all the time. We can talk about heat pumps or EVs. Part of what I'm talking about today is my perspective from working at very different utilities. I worked at Midstate Electric in Central Oregon. That's a co-op with a 5,400 square mile territory and 21,000 meters spread across that. I currently work at EWEB. I actually forgot to update our current meter count, but we are over 100,000, so much different. Latest numbers have mid-state EV penetration about 650 in the territory, and at EWEB 6,700. So quite a bit different there. 55 charging stations thereabouts in public charging stations in EWEB territory, 14 in mid-state. There is also limited car dealerships in Central Oregon that sold EVs. Up until just a couple years ago, you could buy a Chevy EV in Bend, but it could not be serviced in Bend. So very, very different attitudes and knowledge levels about EVs. So looking at what the customer demand is, at Midstate, we really saw the need for education. So we were one of the first utilities in Oregon to buy an EV and wrap it as an advertising opportunity. We were promoting the Northwest hydropower system, so we had powered by water on the car. And I got a lot of questions from people asking if the car actually ran on water. It was illustrative of people's knowledge, and it was a good opportunity to explain how everything electric powered in the Northwest is powered by water. So looking at what people knew about EVs there, we really just highlighted the education. So we were hitting ride and drive events pretty hard. We updated our website, and we're keeping close watch on those metrics. Really just kind of waiting for a point where we were ready to go. And I think decision paralysis came up a little bit ago, maybe. We definitely had some of that. Coming over to EWEB, it has been a very different experience with customer interactions. I get very few calls now that are just, hey, thinking about an EV, what's up with charging? We have had a steady demand on a residential level 2 charging rebate for years. We don't even really have to advertise that anymore. We put updates on social media every now and then, but it's not a huge push, and they keep rolling in. EWEB, we had a e-bike program, which e-bikes, a lot of times I think rebates for EVSE is looked at as maybe a potential load builder for the utility. We know e-bikes aren't really going to do that much for us, but EWEB is a very bike-friendly town, and the e-bikes were looked at as a great way to help everybody access electric transportation. Multifamily, low income, anybody can ride a bike. But we did run into an issue recently. Some entrepreneur out there bought a couple containers of e-bikes from China and then was running ads saying, I work with EWEB and you can get a free bike. So we actually had to suspend that program due to extremely high demand. Again, that's a big difference at the rural utility where things were slower to move. Another large demand at EWEB that we didn't have is multifamily charging. In Mid-States territory, we maybe had 4 apartment complexes, I think. Eugene is a college town, apartments everywhere. So multifamily has been and will continue to be a very large focus. And most of my customer interactions these days are actually with contractors who are looking to install large installations at multifamily sites. Let's talk about funding. So with public power, we are very sensitive about how we use ratepayer funds and sensitive to how that could be perceived. So funding, charging can be difficult from ratepayer funds, difficult to justify, difficult to get boards to approve. But we got lucky in that the state of Oregon developed the Clean Fuels program, which just quickly, it's a market-based program designed to decarbonize transportation in Oregon. So utilities can earn credits on this as a fuel provider, and you get credits for your residential and public charging in your territory, and you can then sell those credits on a marketplace. That has been a huge boon to utilities for funding because it should be a positive feedback loop. You get money from the EVs in your territory, you put that back into EV charging, which gives you more EVs. When we presented that to our board, it was an easy pass. You can use this money for EV development. But even then, those funds don't go so far when you don't have very many EVs in your territory. So at Midstate, we had to be a little creative and collaborate. One of the projects we did there, we collaborated with Bonneville Environmental Foundation and Forth, and got a car share vehicle located at a low-income multifamily site in La Pine, Oregon. That fit right in with our education goal, in that there was a car now located right there in town that people could get a free ride and then rent for a very affordable rate after that. That was a successful program. It was located there for 2 years, ran pretty smoothly. And that would not have been possible at all without the Clean Fuels program. The negative to that is it is market-based, so you are at the whims of the market. So last year, the value of those credits went down a bit, so EWEB did have to suspend some programs. We suspended all of our public charging programs except multifamily because of the high priority that has. We're hoping to bring those back. The market has rebounded a bit. So yeah, looking forward at meeting customer demand, EWEB will still be offering the residential rebate. And then we hope to bring back public level 2 rebates for all locations. And we are looking to not do an active demand response program yet, but we are looking to the future and trying to make ready for that. So our level 2 requirements, they must be demand response capable. And like Jen said, that's one of those things that has to be incorporated into the full utility strategy. And EWEB is doing a demand side potential assessment currently. So when that is finished up, we should have a bit more guidance and hopefully be ready to go with some DR. I believe that is it. So I will pass it back to Whit.
Perfect timing. Jen and Joe, if your camera is working, and same with you, John, if your camera has magically found a way, please join us back and we'll start in on the Q&A. I know we've got some good questions. I wanted to start off with something that both John and Jen and Joe alluded to, with sort of the silos and the different hats that utilities and the different people at different utilities wear. What are some practical ways of breaking down those silos within utilities? And I'll start with Jen, if that's okay.
Sure. I think it comes down to leadership planning. So part of it is a change management discussion and how you organize your teams at the utility itself, and how you plan. You have to think about demand side the way you think about supply side. It's a holistic thing now. It's not one technology that you're working with any more than your fuels are one technology or one solution that you're working with. And so it's funny. I've worked with so many different utilities and customer programs. Customers don't think about it like that. They don't expect you to send 4 different people out when you do a home energy audit to look at different parts of their home, right? They expect the auditor to sort of be able to look at all the parts of your home when they come. So they're not expecting you to send someone to look at their windows and look at their insulation and look at their vehicle or their driveway to see if they can accommodate a charger, and then come look at their roof to see if they can accommodate solar. They would hope you could handle all of it. And I think that's the expectation from the utility as well, is that they would hope you would be able to handle all their energy needs and problems. And we've got to start thinking that way in our industry, is that we need to be holistic energy solutions providers. So that means different structures, different training for energy professionals today, that allows them to think in an ecosystem format, and not just by technology. We need to, I hate the word synergy, but technologies operate in a very synergistic environment when you pair them together too. So from an engineering standpoint, thinking that way is important because they influence each other. Loads influence each other. So it's important that we do take that perspective.
I'll pass it over to John. Same question. Feel free to take it whichever way you want to go, though.
That was great, Jen. I think I often see the utilities, you'll find a champion or several champions that start working together. And sometimes it happens organically, right? But you certainly need supportive leadership to allow that to happen, because there's definitely, utilities where, hey, stay in your lane. And that's really challenging, right? And we've traditionally thought of like, oh, I'm in conservation, or I do DR, or I have this role, and I'm in power management. It's like all of these roles need to be like working together, cross-pollinating ideas, and as you said, Jen, like solutions, they're not just one thing. Unlocking the power of electric vehicles. I had that slide on solid state transformers and dynamic line ratings to kind of show it's like, hey, when you have a customer centric like look at how can we add resiliency to our system, Like you're going to be looking at distributed storage. How can vehicles like help support the grid? Like all these different pieces work together, and it's like putting together a puzzle. And folks from different teams like bring all these different pieces. And I think it's really neat to see what EWEB's doing, because I think they're a great example. Joe, you can speak to one of your colleagues who I think the way that the EWEB is, Juan's role there is a great case study on this, of like how he's able to go across the utility and take data and, shine a light on different things, and like, hey, why aren't we doing this? Or, why should we do that? So I'll let you speak more to that, Joe, and the other things you've noticed there.
I wasn't here when this started to know how the silos were broken down, but yeah, John, you hit the nail on the head. I noticed right away that Juan's position was almost outside the normal organizational box, and Juan knows the people to talk to, and yeah, it was obvious right away. And the stuff he's done with our data team and EWEB's commitment to that. We sent somebody from our data team to the Efficiency Exchange Conference this past summer just so he could understand what we're doing and how we need to use that data. So it's nice to know we have that kind of support.
For folks that are don't know Juan, can y'all, Joe, can you talk a little bit more on how Juan's role at least oversees different divisions, and I guess
yeah he's kind of our main program design guru, and yeah, he's heading up the demand side potential assessment. So he is really diving into all parts of the utility, and I think that's kind of what makes his role work so well. Is he's in all parts all the time.
Perfect.
I think one piece of this that's really interesting that's happening at EWEB is with that role, is able to go find data on things that maybe people wouldn't care about or just haven't thought about necessarily. And I think for any utility, being able to value something is key, right? If we can't put a number to stuff, like, doesn't seem cost effective, so why do it? And I think that's what's one of the really powerful things about Juan's role is, I've seen other utilities that their long-term planning team doesn't value demand side management at all. So it's not in the IRP. It's like, okay, well, if we don't have a number for this and it's not on the IRP, how do we ever move forward on it? And so I think that's a really key piece of, being able to bridge those gaps and then shine that light to say, hey, this is really valuable. And look at how it helps our members or our customers in all these other ways.
Jen, do you see that at other utilities as well?
Yeah, I see when utilities are really connected to what matters. That's when, when the GM gets it, when the C-suite gets it, and they're connected to what their customers really need and what moves the needle. That's when you see things work, right? Like I've seen when the GMs down there, talking to their staff and like listening to customers and willing to hear, showing up at community events and listening to what people are saying, and then they go back and they take action. That's when I see difference. When it's an affordability issue, or they're just not designing the right programs, and then they're out in the field and they're hearing that, and then they go back and they make the changes, whatever it is. Like that's when I see difference. I've seen SMUD do it. I've seen CPS do it. I've seen Austin Energy do it. I've seen Orlando do it. Like it's interesting to watch that happen, and it's powerful too. Generally, the community utilities are really good about it, public power and the cooperatives. But I've seen, folks from DTE also do really well with that in their communities. Ameren's done really well with that in Illinois. It can be very powerful. It's that connection with your community and building trust an understanding of what it is that's happening in that community that isn't going well. So it could be resilience issues, it could be affordability issues, right? We're going to talk about that here in a minute. But getting to the bottom of the problem, like what is it that you're solving for? Is it an affordability issue? Is it a reliability issue? And if you don't know like what you're solving for, is it an access issue? Is it just like a performance efficiency issue at your utility where you're not structured properly? Then you're not going to solve it.
And that leads us to that next question. How can utilities address affordability in practical ways? I mean,
I think the first thing is understanding, again, I think what it is that the problems are. I'll tell you a really funny story. This is kind of not EV related, but it is. Solving for the wrong problem, I think, is a piece of it. So I was touring a home with a utility who were nameless, and they were trying to do some weatherization work. But this can be an EV problem too, like trying to get chargers put in a lower income community that what they really needed was access to car sharing, as an example. Like they didn't need the chargers first. They needed access to cars, or car sharing, or they need access to public transportation. Like solving for the wrong problems when it comes to affordability, I think, is a problem. But the weatherization was funny. So we go to this house, and they're trying to do some weatherization on this house, and they're doing weather stripping, and the lady's like, I don't have glass in my window. How about you fix the window first? I mean, so it's kind of like making sure you're solving for the right problem. So if you go into the community and you just start slapping chargers in, or trying to force a time of use rate down their throats, and instead of looking at what the real issues are for that community related to affordability, for EVs or anything else, like that's not the answer. So really talking to the community, understanding what the problems are that you're trying to solve related to affordability, and then coming at it from a design thinking standpoint to solve for that is a better way.
And I think you kind of hit on something there that we thought was important, and that's using the knowledge that we already have. Anybody could look at a map and say, well, I think charging should be here, 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 and here. But they don't know where our substations are. They don't know what those substations loads look like. They don't know where we have a line upgrade planned already for next year. So getting together with engineers or the people who do know that stuff and being a little more proactive, not that we needed to find sites and say we're going to put charging here, but if we identified some good sites, I'd call them up and initiate the conversation and see if we can get something going.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, making it as affordable as possible to put in charging, right? Exactly. Yeah, I know in Orlando we used right-of-ways where we had the best spots, and then we shopped those around for people. That was a great way to do it.
I think you made a great point, Jen, of like, you need to know what the problem you're addressing is when you're looking to solve is so key. And where I live, I think a lot of places are being affected more by extreme weather. It's affecting wholesale power prices. And we had a heat dome in the Northwest, a couple years ago now, that was like $1 million on wholesale power costs for a day. And that was this huge earth-shattering thing. And then, fast forward a couple years, and the utility spent $60 million in the winter, due to just very different market conditions than we'd had, right? And so it's a lot of upward rate pressure right now. And on the EV side, we can just be advocating for EVs and trying to get as many EVs out there on the road. And they can be a horrible load if they're all plugging in at peak, and we don't have any consideration for when folks are charging. Or they can be the best load we've ever had on the system, where let's say you have Jen, I think you mentioned a case earlier where, more broadly, maybe 300 hours of capacity constrained hours in a year out of 760, and maybe 40, 50, 60 of those are really tight. And if we can do things, if your goal is to address wholesale power costs, or for load falling utilities, your demand charges from your G&T, that's a really tangible thing you can do in different ways, across a portfolio, like folks were talking about earlier.
All right, I want to move to some audience questions. Now we have a time for maybe a few more questions before we get to that final question, but we'll have to do them sort of rapid fire. I want to turn to Skip's question. Is the downturn in the EV market that has resulted in suspending some of the charging programs at EWEB? Joe, so yeah.
So can you repeat the question?
Is the downturn in the EV market what has resulted in the suspending in some charging programs at EWEB?
No, I think it had more to do with just the clean fuels market itself. Projections are that the value should be holding steady or increasing going forward. And we also had an internal accounting change of philosophy about how the value of those were forecasted, and that affected us a little bit. But like I said, we hope to bring those programs back anytime now.
Okay, cool. And something to know for everybody about the clean fuels programs is there's a lot of other aspects to the credits there. There's a lot of renewable diesel, renewable fuels that influence that market as well. So there's a lot there. Next question, in case it wasn't answered already, from James. How would high power battery boosted fast charging be supported by utilities? If boosting that can reduce 70% of the peak power demand, how can utilities promote that as an advantage?
I can take it. Go for it, Jen.
No, it's okay. Feel free.
I'd say real quick, out of the gate, we often think in terms of just reducing demand charges, but if you can stack value from other ways here, that can be really powerful. So, finding places that, as Joe was talking about earlier on this system, let's say you have a spot on your system that's capacity constrained. Well, if you have batteries in that point, you can reduce congestion there and bring this benefit to charging and reduce demand charges. So anytime you can stack those values, I think is important.
Yeah, I was going to say exactly the same thing. I think when you can make it dual use or triple use, right? Also, could that be a resilience hub, right, during an event? So I think anything you can do where you're getting multi benefits out of it, then yeah, I think that's a great play. And I do think utilities are excited about that kind of opportunity for their system.
And to start off with Joe on our final question, what have you seen from utilities and this industry more broadly that gives you optimism for the future?
I think excitement. This is something within the utility that there's something for every department to get excited about, and there aren't a lot of issues that are like that.
Over to John, the next one.
I think it's a neat time in that, I don't know how many of y'all had people just randomly ask you questions about working in this space over the years. Everybody's paying attention and caring about it now, and governors are starting to get involved in how utilities work, and it's an exciting time, and it's scary at the same time, I think, for a lot, but it's going to change a lot, and I think that's really neat.
Yeah, I'm just excited about how fast everything is changing, and I do a lot of work with this next generation of clean energy professionals and utility professionals, and they're coming at it so differently. Talk about thinking outside of the box. They don't even see the box. It's something different altogether to them. They really they're bringing just a very different vibe, a very different energy, to this game. And so that excites me. And I think they are going to change the game altogether. So, watching this next generation of energy professionals come tackle these issues with new tools, new resources, new technologies, you're right. Like, they are going to change the pace and the way we think about things so much faster than we could even think about. It's amazing. I'm excited about that, and I hope to live to see some of those changes, happen in my lifetime. It's going to be great.
I want to thank you all for those comments and for joining us on the panelist. We've got one more slide, and actually I want to take a moderator privilege and ask that everybody here, and especially in this industry, to all of the people, all of the young people that you have connections through, whether it's through college or other avenues, get them interested in this. We need more people interested in energy. We need more people interested in utilities. We need more people to say, what is the grid? And, not have that question be something they're thinking at when they're 50. We want them thinking about this when they're 10, 15, 20. And so that's sort of my own take on what y'all said there. I want to do a little shout out to a upcoming workshop that Forth is doing right after Forth's Roadmap Conference. September 13th through the 15th is the conference, and this workshop is on the 16th. This is going to be up in Seattle, Washington, and we have priority access to rural public utilities in Washington and Oregon, and we can offer 11 complimentary Roadmap Conference registrations to rural public utilities in Oregon, and travel support for the workshop and complimentary workshop registration for Washington utilities. If you have any more interest in, we'll send up more information and links in the recap email. Thank you, Simbi. And wanted to ask if anybody wants to get more involved with the Clean Fuels program, please reach out to me or John, and we can help out. Forth is the backstop aggregator for the Oregon and Washington Clean Fuels programs, and Gradient has been supporting us with the Washington side of that. And we're really enjoying that work, and we want to do more of that, and that involves getting more utilities engaged. And thank you. So we will see everybody. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll hopefully see you in September, if not sooner.